Howdy shipmates, it's Captain Dan here. Welcome to Story Time with Captain Dan, a time to tell tales old and new for young and old, to lift our spirits during this time of the coronavirus when we're stuck at home most of the time. Please keep sending your requests in. Any shout outs I will give. But I wonder what today's tale might be. Let me just have a mouthful of tea though before we begin, because an old sea captain needs his cup of tea. Let's put my old spy glasses on so I can see, because these old captain's eyes have seen so many things. He needs to wear glasses. And let's get comfortable in this seat and let's have a look at today's story. Can you guess what it might be? Oh, it looks like a rather splendid story today. It's called Little Miss Splendid and the Princess. Don't know this tale, but I do like Roger Hargreaves stories, so it should be a good one. Little Miss Splendid, as her name suggests, is very splendid. She wears splendid hats and lives in a splendid house. And how does little Miss Splendid know she's so splendid? She knows because she has a magic mirror that tells her so. Each morning, little Miss Splendid goes into her dressing room and stands in front of the mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most splendid of all? She asks the mirror. Little Miss Splendid is the most splendid of all, answers the mirror. Next door to little Miss Splendid's very splendid house is a castle which has stood empty for many years. One day though, on the way to the shops, little Miss Splendid noticed a sold sign on the castle gate. I wonder who bought that, she thought to herself. The following day, she found out little Miss Splendid was woken by a fanfare of trumpets. She looked out of the window. She saw 3 removal vans and a very splendid looking coach and horses moving into procession up the castle drive. Look at that. A princess had moved in next door. At first, little Miss Splendid was very excited. Living next door to a princess must make me even more splendid, she told herself as she walked to her dressing room. She put on her the most splendid hat and got ready to visit her next door neighbour. But before she left, she stood before her magic mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most splendid of all? She asked the mirror. The princess next door is the most splendid of all, answered the mirror. The mirror didn't have a thumb to do that with, by the way. That was Captain Dan overdoing things, overacting again. Little Miss Splendid could not believe her ears. But I am the most splendid of all. Not any longer, pointed out the mirror. Little Miss Splendid watched the princess for the rest of that week. She looked at the princess's splendid coach, she studied the princess's splendid gown, and she noted the princess's splendid robe. Everywhere she went, nobody noticed her any longer. All they talked about was the princess and how splendid she looked. Little Miss Splendid grew more and more jealous of the princess. The following week, little Miss Splendid went shopping. She bought an incredibly ornate coach and 4 horses, a shimmering princess's hat, and a splendidly long, flowing robe. Little Miss Splendid was so pleased with her new purchase, she went straight into town to show them off. But no one took any notice of her. Good morning, Mrs. Splendid, said Mr. Happy, without any comment on what she was wearing. Did Did you hear that the princess is coming into town later? I can't wait, it's so exciting, said Mr. Happy in his happy way. A very disappointed little Miss Splendid went home and looked in her magic mirror. I do look splendid, she told herself, admiring her reflection. But the mirror disagreed. The princess next door is the most splendid of all, said the mirror, and if I must say, you look a little ridiculous. Again, he didn't point because he doesn't have a hand. Little Miss Splendid was dismayed. But what could she do? The next morning the answer came to her when she was reading the newspaper. The princess had placed an advertisement for a coachman, a maid and a butler. Little Miss Splendid smiled to herself. She had an idea. A little later she went round to see Mr. Bump. There's a job going as the princess's coachman, she told Mr. Bump. It would be perfect for you. Really? Said Mr. Jump as he accidentally broke his window. It's Mr. Bump for you. And he hurried over to the castle to apply. Then little Miss Splendid went to see little Miss Scatterbrain and suggested that she applied to be the princess's maid. Really? Said little Miss Scatterbrain, rushing off to the castle as fast as she could. Lastly, little Miss Splendid visited Mr. Muddle, who was very excited at the idea of being the princess's butler, although he took a few wrong turns on his way to the castle, it must be said, before he remembered where the castle was. When little Miss Splendid saw the princess next, it was very obvious that her three friends had got the jobs. Mr. Bump had crashed the princess's coach and he completely wrecked it. Little Miss Scatterbrain had ironed the princess's robe and had burnt a large hole in it. And Mr. Muddle had muddled up the crown and the bread, and he put the bread in the safe and the princess's crown in the oven and melted it. The princess did not look in the least bit splendid. Little Miss Splendid stood in front of her magic mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most splendid of all? She asked. Little Miss Splendid is the most splendid of all, came the reply. I know, I knew it, I knew I was the most splendid of all, cried little Miss Splendid. Although, continued the mirror, I did hear that the Queen is coming to stay. So that was the story of Little Miss Splendid and the Princess by Roger Hargreaves. I hope you enjoyed that tale. But that's enough for today for Captain Dan. It's time for me to get going and for you get some rest. Until tomorrow when we share another tale, keep sending in requests. You never know what we might get to hear. But I'm going to bid you all a good night now. So, good night, oh sweet repose. Don't lie on your belly because you might just squash your nose. Good night.